Hi everyone, this is Anna Dimichik, and talking to me today is Stephen Houtsma. Stephen was the director of American Councils of International Education back in Siberia, in Novosibirsk and then in Yekaterinburg, from 2001 to 2007. Am I correct, Steve?
Actually, 2003 to 2007.
2003 2000. That's right. Yes, you did tell me that. And I remember you came in after I already came back from my exchange year in the
Mhm.
United States. American Councils for International Education is a large nonprofit organization that runs a number of cultural exchange and educational programs all over the world in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. They are in, I believe, 148 countries. This organization has been established in 1974, and I believe they're celebrating their 50th anniversary this very year. And I was lucky enough to have participated in one of their programs called Future Leaders Exchange Program back in the year 2000 to 2001. And then shortly after I returned to Russia, that's when I met Steve, who came in as a director of, I guess, the Siberian region of this organization. And so, Steve, what were your duties? Did you administer any programs other than Flex? What were you doing as a director?
It was primarily Flex. I think Flex was American Council's primary program. I think at the time they also administered Fulbright and Muskie and a couple other programs. I can't remember the names. I think some of the programs change from organization to organization, depending upon the length of their contract. But mostly it was Flex when I was there.
So it was like 95% of all the things you had to do.
I would say in terms of what I was involved with, yes, probably.
hmm And when you say depending on the length of the contract, you mean the contract with the US State Department? Is that how it worked?
Yeah,
hmm
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think, I think typically, and maybe Flex is an exception, but I think typically every couple of years they review and put those programs up for bid to different American NGOs. Um,
Hmm.
so, yeah.
To your knowledge, do you know of any other organization than American Councils running Flex at any point? I don't think I ever heard of that.
No, Flex I think has always been with American Councils. Like before, I worked with for American Councils. From 2000 to 2003, I worked for another American NGO called IREX. I mean, it was a similar situation that they contracted to administer various programs in different countries, including Russia. IREX's primary program, it was called Business for Russia. Actually, they had two, Business for Russia and another one called Community Connections. Business for Russia, they brought business people over to the States for short-term internships with similar companies. For example, if they had a florist shop, they would try to put them with a similar business in America. And then community connections was similar. It was primarily for NGOs, and they would gather individuals from a different city or a different region together, and it was more or less kind of a group internship where they would stay together, travel together, and be introduced to other types of American NGOs, governmental entities, things like that.
And can you describe the Flex program?
Flex was a year long, really like a school year, so 9, 10 months. Also, an internship for um, students who I believe were 14, 15, 16 years old primarily. They would every fall go through essentially a competition where they had to demonstrate sufficient English skills. They would demonstrate, there were short written tests that were part of the recruiting program, and then there were actual interviews. We would travel from city to city, region to region, and conduct those interviews. Um, Essentially, rate the candidates, and then from there, the decision was made. Um, in our Washington office as to who who was chosen. So the recruiting was actually taking place in the fall. Um, Later in the spring, they actually announced the winners, those that accepted the program. In the summer, there was a short orientation program, and then typically they would leave for the States, maybe July, maybe August before the new school year started. They'd be placed with the host family, and they would attend an American high school for um, 2 semesters, and then return home to their home country, after the school year ended in the summer. So it was basically it was a high school exchange program. Um, they would basically come over to America. They might be a freshman, a sophomore, maybe a junior, I don't know, depending upon their age, but just be immersed in a similar um, educational program in an American high school for a year.
See, it's interesting. You're describing it as short written tests. And I remember it as really brutal. There was like the first test was actually short, it was literally 15 minutes. But the second one, I think it was several hours. And it was hard. And I think it was, and then we had homework. There were like several essays there as well. So there were these two tests, and then there was homework. We wrote several essays with that homework, and we had to get a bunch of recommendations from our school teachers. And yeah, so it was quite a bit of writing, paperwork gathering, and then after those who passed that, they were summoned for the interview, which was also I think half a day long, something like that, right?
Yeah, we would arrive in a city on a specified date and schedule interviews. We would do multiple interviews throughout the day. I'm trying to remember. We would typically schedule maybe 45 minutes or an hour with each candidate so that we'd have time to interview them. And then once the interview was over, the interviewers would, discuss their impressions. There was essentially like a score sheet where we would, include comments and rate the candidates on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest recommendation. Some regions were very active, some were not. Like I remember going to um, Magnitogorsk, and we had 1 day's worth of interviews there. So we're talking probably 8, 9 contestants. In Bashkortostan, um, we were in Ufa for a full week, each day with a full slate of interviews. I think 8, 9, 10 contestants each day. And they were not just from Ufa, they would come from other cities throughout the region. We definitely had the opportunity to meet a lot of different young people, male and female. Um, and some of them really blew us away. Like I can remember coming out of interviews, we would dismiss the candidate, and then it would just be being the other interviewer, and we would just look at each other and say, "Wow, I can't believe that someone that age, 14, 15, 16, had that level of maturity and confidence." And those were those were the candidates that we would typically rate very high.
Do you remember any examples, like what would give you the impression of maturity and confidence?
Well, I would always look at myself and think of myself when I was 15, 16 years old. And, you know, my conclusion was that these kids were so far above where I was at that age that it was just amazing. I do remember, again, I know I keep talking about Ufa, but um, there's one girl from the moment the interview started, like, and, there were standard questions that we would ask. She just displayed such a degree of um, enthusiasm and maturity. Her English was very good. I remember that. Um, you know, and those were the situations where we would try to make the interview more conversational. Like we would get off track because they were so interesting, which was a good thing. I think she actually, I think she sang a song or a couple songs for us too in
Okay.
English.
Uh-huh.
Like from um, a Disney film that she had seen. Candidates ran, kind of the gamut from, shy, um, the impression that they were unsure of themselves. For some of them, their English was a little hard to comprehend. And they would give the impression that, maybe they weren't ready to spend a whole year from their family, their friends in an entirely different country, in a different culture. And then, like I said, there were other candidates like the one that I just described who, like, just like they seemed to be tailor made for the program.
But what
Um,
was it exactly? What was it that they said? Was it that they, I don't know, worked in addition to be going to school? What is it? Can you put a finger on it?
well, I would say um, a lot of the more successful candidates were able to convey, um, that they were very well-rounded individuals, that they didn't just go to school, do their homework, come home, and that was about it. Like many of the more successful students were heavily involved in other activities. It could have been sports, it could have been music, theater, really just about anything. Um, and we would definitely encourage them, if you do go through the program and you do have the opportunity to go to an American high school, definitely try to immerse yourself there in, as many activities as you can as well, first and foremost for your own development, but also it's a great way to meet people, to make friends, to bond. I can remember a couple instances where I heard after the fact that so and so made made the volleyball team or made the basketball team,
Hmm.
made the cheerleading squad.
That was
Um,
tough. Cheerleading
yeah,
is hard to get
things
into.
like that.
Mhm.
Depending upon the high school that they went to.
Do you remember any of the test assignments, like those group assignments? Did your recruiting team do any of those? Because I remember we had some in addition to the interviews, and there were just different situations, like what would you do if you found yourself in this and that situation. And one that particularly, I guess, impressed me was the dilemma of okay, you and your group of like 5 or 6 people, I don't remember how many there were, are on an island full of cannibals. How do you survive? Did you guys do that?
Yeah, yeah, you're kind of jogging my memory now. Uh, when we came back for the interviews, to any particular city, like I said, we typically schedule a full day, perhaps 8 to 10 um, competitors, and we'd start the day with kind of a group activity, kind of similar
Mm-hmm.
to what you're describing now, where um, we describe a situation, um, you know, uh, how would you work together as a team? What would you do? How would you approach this? And that was also an opportunity for me and my interview partner to kind of observe the individuals in a group setting. That also kind of came into play as well. Not only just our individual interview, but like, um, was somebody sitting on the side, withdrawn, not really engaged with the group? At the other end of the spectrum, like who were the leaders in the group? But even then, like we didn't want people that were necessarily too strong and too overbearing. We wanted people that would be able to, or kids that would be able to interact and compromise and get along and hear each other's point of view. So yes, actually, to your question, I do remember that as well.
Yeah, it's just that the cannibal thing was unsettling, I remember.
I don't remember the cannibal thing. Maybe that was something before I came along.
Right, probably. Yeah, but these things they're very normal in American classrooms, right? From what I remember, usually the classroom, at least in some of the classes, you would have this sort of group projects where you would be expected to break into groups and solve problems together. But in Russia, it was pretty foreign at that time. I don't know about now, but back then the entire activity was so very new to everyone. It was literally just, okay, how do you adapt to this completely new challenge on the spot and in another language?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's common, maybe more common in American high schools now. I mean, remembering back to my university days, I can certainly remember many, many, many group projects that we were assigned to do, where you were assigned to work with basically a group of completely unknown people to you, and you had to, you know,
Figure it
arrive
out
at them.
right
Yeah,
now.
figure it out. Exactly.
Hmm. Yeah, but no, very useful. Definitely skill for life. Do you remember which demographics most students came from? Like what types of families?
You know, it was really hard to get a picture of their day to day life just on the basis of, the interview. We would ask them a lot of standard questions, but I don't think, um, even then, it would be difficult to try to guess at what all of their home circumstances were. I think just as a rule, at least, after the initial round of the competition where a lot of students were weeded out, um, and they moved on to the second level. Um, I think at that point, a lot of them, had a pretty good knowledge of English. They were involved in various activities, which kind of all points to the fact that they probably had a very supportive home atmosphere. Their parents probably, um, encouraged them to do different types of activities, to achieve, to study hard in school, to get good grades. Whether that was, middle class or upper middle class, or even, you know, I'm sure we had some students that were relatively well off. Um, I would say probably, you know, a lot of them just came from very um, average middle class Russian families. You know.
Yeah, that matches what I recall. And I think the students who are well off, there were probably fewer of them because a lot of parents were very apprehensive of sending their child for a year into an environment that they had no control over. Because I don't know if you recall, but the conditions of participating in this program were that you basically were very limited in communication with your family back at home. You were supposed to be fully immersed in your life in America, and the communication with your parents was literally one phone call a month, 15 minutes, and that's it. I don't know if that was changed later, but that was the rule when I went. And so I know that my parents really struggled with that, and many other parents did struggle with that too. And I know parents who actually decided that their kids would not be going because they were not comfortable sending their child off to like across the ocean with no control over what's happening whatsoever. Right. So
Yeah.
it seems like,
Well,
to me, from what I recall, it's really middle to lower middle class, but with, I would say, families with academic background and academic aspirations. So oftentimes not wealthy, but parents who read books and who really wanted their children to succeed.
yeah, and it was essentially a free program. Like
Hmm.
if you went through the competition and you were awarded a scholarship, an internship, it was essentially all paid.
Right.
I think during the uh, uh, orientation program that we did in the summer, we would tell students like, it is a free program. Your host family will be providing for you. You'll have food on the table. You'll have shelter. You'll have transportation to and from school, whatever that may be. You are free to earn money within reasonable limits. You can bring money with you. And to your point too, I think, a lot of it depended on the parents. Like, were they ready, even if,
Hmm.
whatever their children thought about the program, uh, were the parents ready to let their children go for a full year? And you know, they they stepped into a completely different educational program. Like um, I remember a big part of it was like, even if I do decide to go to America, when I come back and I still pass all of my exams so that I can move on with my fellow classmates to the next grade level or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a concern of some of the parents. But I think too, like wealthy individuals by that time in the 90s and the 2000s, there were already lots of commercial
Yes.
programs available within Russia where, if a family had the means, they could just essentially pay to send their children to, on short-term overseas
Summer camp.
programs. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Summer
basically.
English camps were popular. Actually, lots of people in my school did that. These. And to the point about the program being free, also the American host families were not paid either, right? I think it's really important to emphasize this, that the families were volunteering. They were provided, I believe, reimbursement, a few $100s for that year to maybe buy a bed, buy additional clothes for the student, but they were not paid for this. And everybody who stepped up and volunteered, they really did it most out of curiosity and the goodness of their heart, and just because they wanted to open their home to a foreign student. And that was an amazing thing.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. I think essentially I mean, for all practical purposes, they were volunteers. I think they got some sort of small stipend. Um, some of them, I'm sure, just turned it down, said, I don't need it. I have everything that I need for my host child here available. Um, uh, Placement was always interesting. Again, they placed um, they placed students all throughout the country, from Alaska to Hawaii to North Dakota to Mississippi. Um, I can distinctly remember. I think it was. I think it was Yekaterinburg where they placed um, one student with a same-sex couple, and I think it worked out fine in the end. Um, but I think there was some initial hesitation on the part of the student's parents. It was something pretty unknown. Um, I don't think American councils tried to push that too much. I think for the most part it was, traditional families, husband, wife, or maybe single father, single mother, or something like that, maybe other children in the house. Um, but there were instances where there were issues and maybe the student had to leave early, maybe there was some sort of discipline problem, they got into some sort of trouble and had to come back home, but thankfully those were pretty isolated. Those didn't happen too often.
Right. The goal was really to place the students with an average American family, right? And for the students to experience America as it is, not like the nicer side or the more prim and proper side. Just you get what you get, right? I believe there was some basic screening for criminal background of the families, but that's really it. I think the income did not have to be high at all. Yeah, and from what I can tell, most students were placed in more like rural areas, which is probably because that's where people tend to have an extra room or two in the house, right? Just very basic, rather than in the cities. And
Yeah,
that's just how it is, and you get all kinds of families. And it was really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I lived in a trailer house in South Carolina, and it was quite an experience.
I'm trying to
The
remember.
nicest family ever.
Were you with a single mother?
No, no, I
No.
was with a family, husband, wife, and two younger children. Yeah, but it was interesting. And I was really surprised to find out that a trailer house in South Carolina was actually more luxurious in some way than my family's apartment in Siberia. There was more room, hot water was running without any interruptions. It was just, in many ways, nicer.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny. I remember our orientation sessions where we would tell them, you're going to live with a typical American family, quote unquote, in a typical American home, um, you may have a room in the basement. And we would have to explain, don't
But it's a
worry,
good thing.
that doesn't mean you're going to be living, you know, in a damp place with a dirt floor. It's a regular room, trust me. In fact, I'm
It's
sitting
a
in
regular room that a lot of teenagers would want, right? In the States,
yeah,
really.
yeah, in
Yeah.
fact, I'm sitting in one of my basement rooms right now in my house.
And it looks nice. It's very well lit.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So, talking about these orientation sessions, what do you think were the most important things that were taught?
They were very general, and it was essentially the same orientation program every year. Essentially, it was 2 days. I remember students would be scheduled to arrive on a specific day. They'd be, wherever we held it. A lot of times it was we would contract with like a summer day camp where they had cabins, facilities like for students. They would stay together, two or three to a room. They'd arrive. We'd have a full day the next day, um, almost a full day the second day, and then they'd be released to go home. One of the key phrases that was kind of hammered to the students over and over was not better, not worse, just different.
It's not good, it's not
Um,
bad, it's just different. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, obviously the idea being that you're going to be in a strange atmosphere. Some of it will be familiar, some of it will be strange, some of it you may not understand, at least initially. Um, but be patient and just give it a chance. Um,
Right.
and again, it was, you know, taking the stance that, again, it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. We tried to convey that through a lot of different types of activities throughout those 2 days.
Right. And there was also an important part about trying something new, right? If you're offered a new food, just try.
Yeah.
I remember that. And also, I think a lot of several, at least several concepts I was exposed to for the first time in that orientation, but they seem to be coming back now as people are, I guess, exploring things more about how we adapt to different environments. I think one of them was about peach people and coconut people. Do you remember that?
I can't say I do. Um,
Mm.
I, I, another thing that I remember, and I think we covered it early on, is we would make an analogy. Like you could do a couple different types of analogy, but they basically analogies, but they meant the same thing. We would do the iceberg. Like the iceberg, you can
Hmm.
only see a small
Right.
portion, um, with the majority of the iceberg being under the surface. We would use the same analogy with the tree. You can see the tree, but you can't see all the roots under the surface. And again, it was really kind of in the context of trying to understand, um, traditions and culture, and like you may see something very superficial, but there's a lot of history and background and other things that may not immediately be visible to you that kind of drives that culture, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Um, I distinctly remember, that was one of the early lessons that we conducted, typically on the first day.
Right. Yes, I do remember those. Yeah, and coconut people and peach people, it's more like what is it that some people are really open and sweet and nice on the outside, but it doesn't mean that you're their best friend, right? Their heart is still like hard, right? So just because they're very nice and friendly, it does not mean much. And then other people are more coconut people, and Russian people tend to be like coconut type of personalities, right? They're harder on the outside. They're not necessarily all smiley, but if you make it like a step into their inner circle, that's when they're going to be all nice and sweet, right? So
Um,
that kind of
like
comparison,
I like that. I don't think we did
you
that.
didn't
That
have
must
that.
have gone by the
Mhm.
wayside when we started doing our orientations. But I like that. It took
Yeah,
me
I
a
think it's
moment.
a good explanation. Yeah, and I
It took me a
encountered
moment
it
for you to
recently
explain it.
again too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you recall any specific you already mentioned it earlier that there were some failures, but would you recall any specific examples?
I think for the most part, it was either disciplinary issues at school. they may have gotten into conflicts with either other students or even their teachers. I think there was one specific instance where a student actually brought a knife to school, which, I don't think anything happened. But I think just the mere fact that they did, I think that was grounds for expulsion from the
Hmm.
program. Um, and I think others were just within the family that they were placed in. But if that were the case, as long as it wasn't something um, necessarily serious, dangerous, it wasn't a run-in with the law. Maybe it was just a personality conflict with the family or the children in the family. Typically, they would make an effort to move them
To a different
to a
family.
different host family, and that also thankfully didn't happen too often. And I can't remember a lot of specific instances, but that was something that occurred as well.
I remember the fear of not doing well in school was quite prevalent because I believe we were told that if we make, I believe, below C minus and below, that would be like grounds for terminating the program. And that was very scary because, I don't know, for me at least, my English was not that great in the first semester. I was afraid. Like, I mean, luckily, of course, it was not, in the end, it all worked out and the grades were good, but that was scary. There was this added pressure of doing well in school.
Yeah, yeah, no, you bring up a good point too. I that You just reminded me of. I think there was a minimum, more or less a minimum standard as far as grades that they had to maintain, and I don't think
Yeah.
it was day to day, week to week. I think it
No.
was, whatever they came out with at the end of the quarter or the semester.
Yeah, something like that. And I haven't heard of anybody actually getting expelled from the program over that. But yeah, I remember that being in my mind and spending hours on homework. And that was back when we had paper dictionaries, right? It was, you could not go
Yes.
online and just Google the words. It was
Yeah.
paper dictionaries from Russia.
Yep.
Half of the words were not even in them. Yeah. So, you probably got to meet a lot of students before they went on the program and afterwards. Could you talk about that a little bit? Did people change?
Well, it's good to see you. I mean, I, I think, I think the last time we saw each other was literally 20 years ago when we left
21.
Novosibirsk. But like you with social media, I've seen other familiar faces from the program that, you know, have kind of scattered throughout the world. Some are here in the States, some are in Europe, maybe elsewhere as well. I know that you had a definite interest in China as well, and you probably spent some time there. After we left, and this was 17 years ago. For all intents and purposes, I really did lose direct contact with a lot of Flex alumni. But again, the nice thing about social media is that I can then see like where you are and what happened to you all, or what happened to some of you at least. Like again, I know you have a successful law practice in California. I was talking about another alumna from Ufa, Svetlana Shamasova. Um, she and her spouse live in the New York area. I think she does some sort of financial consulting. Um, Another individual, Eldar Rizanov. No, Eldar Rizanov. That's the director. Eldar Rivzanov.
Okay.
His last name
Yeah.
is Rivzanov. Um, he served in the military for a couple of years. Received his American citizenship. I'm not sure where he is now. I think he was in Missouri. Um, you know, I think I think you guys are probably the exception. I think by and large, a lot of the alumna, returned home, finished their university studies in Russia, or, hopefully
I actually
working.
did that. I returned
Yeah,
and finished and then
yeah,
ended up here anyways.
yeah.
All right.
I think the majority of those students from Russia that went through the program are probably still in Russia. Um, but I think it was a great opportunity for those students that had kind of an international mindset, that it was kind of hopefully a springboard, um, for their future. Um, you know, that it kind of took that fear away. Yes, I can succeed in a different environment. I can live in a different country. I can go through a different type of educational program and succeed. Honestly, for me, I think that was one of the most satisfying aspects of the program is like if you had that inside you, that maybe Flex was just, in some small way a catalyst to help kind of put you on your way.
Well, not in a small way, I would say. It was, the program is truly life changing for many, I think, because when you're a teenager, yet you're already very much formed by your environment, and then you have to put everything you already know aside and start learning and building yourself anew in an environment that is so very different from the one you came from. It's no small thing. It really melts your brain. It forces you to just really build yourself from the ground up and in another language too. You
Mm.
know, because for example, I know that like I was saying earlier, it seems like many students came from families like who were very high on academic pursuits. They really wanted to give their kids good education at the very least, right? And then you get in the environment like South Carolina, rural South Carolina, where students lock the teacher out of the classroom and have fun. And apparently that's a cool thing in that school, right? And you have to find your way in that new environment without alienating everyone, and you do, and it's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
interesting, right? It's
No.
just learning all those social interactions, and you have to just catch it on the fly. But you mentioned that your Russian was passable, working knowledge of Russian, right? I think your Russian was pretty good actually. So how did you learn it?
Um, in the early 90s, when everything was opening up, um, I had an opportunity to travel to Russia in the spring of 1992. It was
Mm-hmm.
May, June. Um, we started in Moscow, and from there it was actually a river cruise. We went on to Yaroslavl, Kostroma. Um, Eventually, we ended up in St. Petersburg. It was a 2 week trip. It was really fascinating, and it was really interesting um, because of when we went. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
literally the spring after the fall,
Yes.
and you know, on the advice of some people that had been there before, like I brought extra pairs of jeans and t-shirts, and amazingly, I was actually able to trade stuff. Like especially when we got out into the provinces, I think I sampled black caviar for the first time. I think I traded a T-shirt for a tin of caviar. Um, I traded something else for some commemorative coins that I still have to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, I did have the opportunity to travel there, and that kind of spurred a desire to maybe further study the language. So I did for a couple years. It was more or less kind of independently.
Mm.
I had just a couple tutors that I had met, that I would meet with maybe once a week just to talk with. Um, and then when I went to grad school, that was 96 to 98, um, uh, my major was economics, but I could also they let me take a minor in Russian language. So I was able to take some courses through the university there as well. So I've
Those are
lost a
some good
lot.
courses.
Yeah. So I mean, I've lost a lot. Obviously, when you're not immersed in it on a daily basis, you lose a lot. But thankfully, my wife and I, um, we still, we still speak Russian at home. Our eldest daughter, she was, um, she was 9 when she came here. So
Mm.
Russian will always be her native language, even though she speaks English without an accent as well. Our middle daughter, the one that's serving in the Air Force, her Russian is pretty good, but she came
Mm.
here when she was 3. So, the Russian that she has is really in large part um, due to her mother. And then my son, who was born here, again, he gets Russian from his mother, but compared to his elder sister's speech, it's not as good. But anyway, I just thought it was, I was very fascinated by the country, by its history. I've read a lot of literature, I had read a lot of Russian literature. And then once I got to Russia, especially when I was in Novosibirsk, I started to read, a lot of the same literature in its
In
native
Russian.
Russian. Yeah.
Mm, it's hard,
Um,
even for
yeah.
us.
And,
Yeah.
but even now, again, with YouTube and with streaming, we're constantly watching various Russian podcasts.
You
Um,
probably watch more Russian podcasts than I do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We've got our favorite podcasts that we watch regularly.
What are they?
Um, um, One that my wife likes a lot. It's called Anton S.
Mhm.
It's just a lot of gossip about. It's a lot of show business gossip, but there are other obviously more serious uh, video bloggers podcasts that we listen to. One is his name is Alexander Balu. Another one is Anton Hardin, Maxim Sharf. And then we'll watch Voice of America, BBC, um, Deutsche
Mhm.
Welle, other. I mean, a lot of times we'll just because we kind of zero in on certain types of podcasts. We'll just turn on YouTube and here's something new that we haven't seen. And we watch a lot of satire as well.
That's always the best.
Yeah.
Are there any highlights of your life in Russia? Like what impressed you? What scared you?
The time that I spent there, I mean, it was very interesting for me. Again, unlike our flex students, I was already an adult. I was already in my 30s. It was kind of a new period in my time. I had already been a student. I already had my bachelor's degree. I was already married. I had already had um, some professional work experience. But it was when I went to Russia, it was kind of just it was an opportunity to kind of take a different direction in my life and change things, and I'm glad I did. Um, I met my wife Svetlana there. It was just especially at the beginning, it was very fascinating in spite of some of the difficulties. I liked the aspect that for both IREX and American councils, I had the opportunity to do a lot of traveling and not just to Moscow, but in regional cities.
To real
Um,
Russia?
I got to meet the real Russians on planes, trains, and automobiles, especially trains.
Hmm.
Spent a lot of time in sleeper cars, traveling from city to city.
Really?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've done the whole Trans-Siberian end to end, not in one shot, but in
Hmm.
different chunks at different times. I got to go to places like Kamchatka, um, Chukotka, Kizil, Khakassia, yes, a lot of out of the way places that even a lot of Russians themselves haven't had the opportunity
Right, never.
to visit. So
Hmm.
I love the travel aspect of it. I had a lot of independence as a recruiter. I had to be in a certain place at a certain time for a certain amount of time, but I was really pretty. I had a lot of autonomy in how I organized my day each day. During the recruiting period, in the fall, I was away from home a lot. But thankfully, the remainder part of the year, I got to spend time wherever I was living at the time. We had some nice apartments. Um, you know, we made friends, in the different cities that we lived in. It was fun. It was almost 8 years. At a certain point, and it was in 2007 that we left. It was, you know, before that, obviously, but, we kind of came to the conclusion that it was time to maybe move on. And so, yeah, I obtained immigration visas for my wife and my eldest daughter. Um, and we came here in March 2007. And my wife and elder daughter who I adopted um, while I was there. I mean, they both have American citizenship, American passports.
Hmm.
My second daughter, that was born in Novosibirsk, she had American citizenship by birth, by
Right.
virtue of me. And then my son was born here.
Hmm. Is there anything else you would want to mention that we haven't discussed?
I think Flex was a great program, in a different world, under different circumstances. It would still be going today. Um, it's sad that relations have deteriorated to the point that they are now. I would like to go back. And I would like to go back to maybe some of my old stomping grounds in the Far East. Um, uh, I think Khabarovsk was always one of my favorite Russian cities. Uh, I would like to go back. Now is not the time. We'll see what the future brings. I I thought it was a very worthwhile program, and I'm sad that at least in Russia, it's you know it's no longer being conducted. I'm happy that in other countries it is. I think it's a good opportunity. It's citizen diplomacy. It's like you and I were talking about a little bit earlier. If a young person has that special mindset, hopefully it can be kind of a catalyst, a springboard in their future profession. Um, I wouldn't trade my time in Russia for anything. I'm glad I did it. It was fascinating. It probably changed me in a lot of ways, um, and I happy that as a result I got to meet a lot of very um, interesting, qualified, um, great people, like present company included.
Thank you.
When I first met you 20 plus years ago, I don't know if I would have foreseen that we'd be talking here today. You with your own law firm in the United States, me doing what I'm doing. But
I
um,
would not have foreseen that either.
yeah, you obviously had it in you somewhere, and that's how you ended up where you are now. So
And Flex was big, really big on that.
yeah.
Definitely. Like the one thing that was truly life changing, I think that was this program for me.
And how did you find out about it? Did they just advertise it in your school?
Yes, they
Yeah.
did. Hmm.
Mhm.
And I actually, I was so lucky I got a chance to participate twice. On the first time, I did not make it.
See, that's another good point. I, I can recall. Yes, there were. Um, it was not uncommon. There were numerous instances where students did not pass the first time, but on the second try they did. That was something that we tried to impart. When we went out recruiting, it's like this may not be your year, but as long as you're eligible in terms of age, we'll be back next year and you can try again.
Hmm. Yeah. And the second time, it was a little bit more predictable. At least I knew what to expect on this little test.
Mm.
My English got better by then. Yeah. In what ways, you mentioned that the trip to Russia probably changed you in several ways. Like, what ways? How?
Um, I had done some traveling throughout the United States. I had been to Canada and Mexico. Um, and I had had my initial trip to Russia back in 1992, just as a tourist. But I think just having the opportunity to, actually live in a different country, um, not as a tourist, but, as someone who rents an apartment, goes grocery shopping, um, has to figure out how to get from A to B on the bus or, what have you. Just living a normal life like a normal citizen in a different culture. That, you know, even at when I was in my 30s, maybe helped me to mature a little bit more, become more sure of myself.
Hmm.
Um, like I said, met a lot of great people. can't say that all experiences were great. Some were not so great. Um,
Naturally.
uh, a lot of times those experiences that weren't so great were with the Russian bureaucracy that I may have
Mm-hmm.
had to deal with at different levels. But for the most part, my interactions with everyday people were um, exactly like they are here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people you engage more with, some you don't. With some you have some sort of connection, some you may not. Um, probably reinforce something that I probably already innately knew, is that really people are people.
People are people. Definitely. Okay, great. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure discussing your recollections of Flex and also your time in Russia with you
Well, you too. Good to see you. I don't think I've actually heard your voice also for
in 21
20
years,
plus
right?
years. Yeah. But
That is true. We corresponded a little bit, but
yeah,
other
well,
than that, yeah, likewise.